It was the summer of 1972, in the dry heart of Custer County, Nebraska. A summer of consequence. The air was thick with the smell of hot dust and alfalfa, a smell that clung to the back of the throat. It was a smell of money for some, a smell of worry for others. For Elspeth Finch, a widow of 52, it was simply the smell of home. Her land, 320 acres of it, sat astride the sand hills, a place of subtle beauty and unforgiving logic. Her husband, Thomas, had understood that logic. He had read the land like a book, its long history written in the layers of soil and the quality of the light. He had been gone for 2 years, taken by a tractor that rolled on a gentle slope, a momentary lapse of attention that the land did not forgive. Now the logic of the place fell to Elspeth to decipher, and she had made a decision that began not with a grand announcement, but with a phone call. A single call from the rotary phone in her kitchen, its black Bakelite cool against her cheek. She called a man named Gus Richter, of Richter & Sons well drilling over in Broken Bow. The call was brief, it was practical. It was, to anyone who might have overheard it, utterly mad. She wanted a new well. This in itself was not madness. Wells failed. They ran dry. But the Finch well, the one Thomas had sunk 25 years prior, was not failing. It was a good well, a reliable well. It drew from the great Ogallala Aquifer, the subterranean sea that gave life to the high plains. It had never once sputtered, not in the dry spell of 56, not in the scorcher of 64. It provided water for her small herd of Hereford cattle, for the kitchen garden that fed her through the year, for the single shaded cottonwood tree that stood sentinel by the farmhouse. The Finch well was fine, and that was the heart of the matter, the heart of the confusion, the seed of the talk that would soon spread across the county like wildfire through dry grass. Elspeth Finch, who had a perfectly good well, was drilling a second one, not a replacement, an addition. The men of the county had one word for it: grief. They said it in the cool dark of the feed store, leaning against sacks of Purina. They said it in the sun-baked parking lot of the Lutheran church on Sunday mornings. They said it over lukewarm coffee at the Arrowhead Cafe. Grief, they nodded, had finally taken hold of the poor woman. Thomas was a good man, a smart farmer. His absence had left a hole. Elspeth, they reasoned, was trying to fill a hole in her heart by digging another one in the ground. It was a woman's logic, a sad, expensive, pointless gesture. Her neighbor to the east, Silas Croft, a man whose fences were always perfectly taught and whose opinions were always loudly stated, was less poetic. He called it foolishness, plain and simple. He had watched the survey crew arrive in their dusty Ford pickup, watched them tramp across Elspeth's east pasture, not 50 yards from his own property line. Watched them drive stakes into the ground, a bright orange flag fluttering on a thin metal rod. The spot was wrong. Even a child knew you dug a well near the house, near the barn, for convenience, for the simple economy of pipe and wire. This new spot was 1/4 mile from her house, out in the open pasture, a place of nothing but grass and sky. To get water from there to the house, to the stock tanks, would require a fortune in trenching and piping. It was impractical. It was inefficient. It was, Silas told anyone who would listen, the dumbest damn thing he had ever seen. But the decision was made, the call was placed, and on a Monday morning in late July, the sound of it arrived. A low rumble at first, growing into a mechanical groan that vibrated through the very soil. The Richter & Sons drilling rig. It was a behemoth, a 1968 failing model 1500, painted a faded but defiant yellow. It crawled down the county road, leaving a cloud of diesel smoke in its wake, and turned onto Elspeth's property. It was a machine built for one purpose: to conquer the earth, to pierce its hide and draw out its lifeblood. The cost was the first thing everyone asked. Not Elspeth, of course. She never spoke of it. But the numbers leaked out, as numbers always do. Gus Richter was a talker, not a gossip, but a man proud of his work and its value. The numbers became a litany, a cautionary tale told across the county. There was the initial geological survey and dowsing consultation. $250, a fee most farmers, who trusted their own intuition or the inherited wisdom of their fathers, would never pay. They knew where the water was. It was down. There was the transport and setup fee for the rig itself. $500, a flat rate, non-negotiable. It covered the diesel, the wear on the tires, the time of the two-man crew, Gus and his boy Leo. Then came the drilling, the real heart of the expense. Richter charged by the foot, $4 a foot for the first 100 feet, $5 a foot for the next 100, and so on, the price escalating with depth, a recognition of the increasing difficulty, the strain on the equipment, the simple physics of fighting gravity. The existing Finch well was 180 feet deep, a respectable depth, more than enough. The talk at the Arrowhead Cafe was that Elspeth could save a little money if she just went to a similar depth, at least cap the foolishness at a manageable figure. She did not. Gus Richter's crew drilled past 180 feet on the second day. They drilled past 200 feet. They drilled past 300. The sound of the drill, a grinding, percussive chewing, became the new soundtrack of the prairie. It echoed across the flat land, a constant, nagging reminder of Elspeth's folly. Silas Croft heard it in his own yard, a sound that set his teeth on edge. It sounded like money being burned. It sounded like waste. They stopped at 450 feet, a depth unheard of for a simple farm well in that part of the county. That was the depth for town wells, for irrigation pivots that watered a whole quarter section of corn. It was overkill. It was madness. The cost of the drilling alone, $2,950, a sum that could have bought a new used John Deere tractor, a sum that could have added 20 head of cattle to her herd. But the hole was just the beginning. A hole in the ground is not a well. Next came the casing, 6-inch diameter, Schedule 40 steel pipe, 450 feet of it, plus the surface casing. It came delivered on a flatbed truck from a supplier in Grand Island. The cost of the steel, a commodity price that fluctuated with markets in faraway cities, was $7.30 per foot. $3,285 for pipe. Pipe to line a hole that nobody thought needed to be dug. Then the gravel pack. 120 bags of graded silica gravel poured into the annular space between the casing and the borehole wall. To filter the water, to support the casing. 35 cents a bag. Another $42. A small sum, but it added to the tally. It was another detail for the men at the feed store to memorize and recite. The well screen, a 20-foot section of specialized stainless steel pipe at the very bottom, with slots so fine they could stop a grain of sand. This was not ordinary pipe. This was a piece of engineering. It cost $300 by itself, for a piece of metal no one would ever see again. The bentonite seal, a clay slurry pumped down to seal the upper portion of the well to prevent surface water from contaminating the deep, pure water she was so extravagantly seeking. $200 for the material and the pumping. The total was already staggering. It was a monument to poor judgment, growing more expensive by the day. But the most expensive part was yet to come. The heart of the well, the pump. For a well this deep, a surface pump was useless. It needed a submersible pump, a motor and pump assembly designed to live its entire life at the bottom of a hole, suspended in water. Elspeth did not choose a standard pump. She did not choose the reliable Franklin Electric model that 90% of the farms in Custer County used. No, her husband Thomas had left behind more than just land. He had left behind notebooks, ledgers filled with his neat, blocky handwriting, records of rainfall, of crop yields, of cattle weights, and research. Pages and pages of research, cut from magazines like The Progressive Farmer and Irrigation Age. He had been studying water, studying it with a quiet intensity that no one, not even Elspeth, had fully understood at the time. In one of those notebooks, there was a page dedicated to pumps. He had circled a brand name, Grundfos, a Danish company. Their pumps were made of stainless steel, not just the impeller, but the whole housing. They were more efficient. They were more reliable. They were, of course, vastly more expensive. And they were difficult to get. Gus Richter had to special order it from a distributor in Omaha. The pump itself, a Grundfos SP model, rated for her depth and desired flow rate, cost $2,100. The standard Franklin pump would have been $900. More waste, more foolishness. The men at the cafe shook their heads. Stainless steel. What did a cow care if the water came up through a cast-iron pump or a stainless steel one? Then came the pipe to carry the water to the surface. Not steel pipe. Elspeth insisted on 1.5-inch polyethylene pipe. It came in a massive black coil. Easier to install, yes, but more expensive than the galvanized steel Richter's crew was used to. 450 feet of it. Another $500. The pitless adapter, a clever brass fitting that allowed the pipe to exit the casing below the frost line. $150. The heavy-duty waterproof electrical cable to power the pump. 450 feet of it. Another $300. The pressure tank, an 80-gallon Well X-Trol model, bigger than the one in her own basement. $400. The control box, the pressure switch, the check valves, the gauges. Another $250. The drilling was done. The well was cased. The pump was installed. The total, before a single drop of water had been brought to the surface, was $10,727. But it was not a well yet. It was just a hole with expensive things in it. The final, and perhaps most galling part of the expense was the trenching. A 1/4 mile of it, 1,320 feet. From the new wellhead in the east pasture to the existing plumbing network at the barn. A local man with a ditch witch was hired. He charged $1 a foot. $1,320, plus another $406.72 for the pipe to lay in the trench. The final tally, the number that became legend in Custer County, $12,453.72. In 1972, for a second well, a well she did not need. The day they finally turned it on, a small crowd had gathered. Not officially, just neighbors who happened to be driving by. Silas Croft stood by his fence, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. Gus Richter flipped the breaker. For a moment, nothing. Then, a low hum from the ground. A shudder in the pipe. And then, water. A thick, clear, cold torrent of it, gushing from the temporary outlet pipe into the pasture. It was powerful. It was clean. It was, undeniably, water. Gus measured the flow. 30 gallons a minute, twice the rate of her old well. The recovery rate was instantaneous. It was, he had to admit, a hell of a well, the best he had ever drilled. Elspeth watched the water flow for a moment, her face unreadable. She walked over to the stream, bent down, and cupped a handful of it. She did not drink it. She just looked at it, glistening in her palm. Then she nodded once to Gus. "Cap it," she said. The word fell into the silence. Cap it. Gus Richter blinked. His son Leo stopped coiling a rope. Silas Croft, 50 yards away, uncrossed his arms. Cap it. Not hook it up. Not let's connect the pipes. She had them weld a thick steel plate over the top of the casing with a locked, tamper-proof access hatch for the electrical conduit. She had them disconnect the new pipe from the barn's plumbing. The quarter-mile trench was filled in, the earth smoothed over, the grass seed scattered. The 80-gallon pressure tank was stored in her barn, still in its cardboard box. Within a week, all that remained of the $12,000 project was a small circle of disturbed earth in the east pasture, and a 6-inch steel pipe, capped and locked, sticking a foot out of the ground. A tombstone. A monument not just to foolishness, but to a special, spectacular, and expensive kind of insanity. Now the talk in the county changed. It was no longer grief. Grief was sad, but understandable. This was something else. This was a woman who had well and truly lost her senses. To spend all that money, to go to all that trouble, and then to just leave it. It defied all known logic of farming, of finance, of common sense. It was an insult to the very idea of prudence. The story was told and retold, each telling adding a new layer of absurdity. The stainless steel pump from Denmark, the depth of 450 feet, the final damning command. Cap it. The words became a punchline. Any time someone in Custer County did something wasteful or illogical, someone else would say, "He's about to cap it." Elspeth Finch became a local legend, not the good kind. She became a cautionary tale, a ghost at the feast of conventional wisdom. She did not seem to notice. Her life continued as it had before. She tended her cattle. She worked her garden. She paid her bills. The old well continued to pump its steady 15 gallons a minute. The capped pipe in the east pasture sat silent, season after season. The years passed. 1973, a wet year. The corn grew tall. The cattle grew fat. No one worried about water. The capped pipe in Elspeth's pasture was a source of amusement. 1974. A decent year. Prices were good. The talk had mostly died down. Elspeth's Folly, as it was now known, was just a feature of the landscape, like a strange rock formation. 1975. The first hint of dryness. The summer was long and hot. The creeks ran a little lower. Some of the shallower, older wells in the county started to sputter. Men started talking about deepening their wells. They did not talk about it in front of Elspeth. 1976. The bicentennial. A year of parades and fireworks. And drought. A serious one. The state officially declared a water emergency. Pastures turned brown. The corn withered on the stalk. The price of hay skyrocketed. The Ogallala, the great inexhaustible sea beneath their feet, began to feel exhaustible. The water level in the Finch well dropped, not by much, but for the first time it dropped. Elspeth had to ration water for her garden. Her cattle, their tongues lolling in the heat, crowded the stock tank, which was slower to refill than it used to be. Silas Croft's well, which was shallower than Elspeth's original well, was failing badly. He had to sell off half his herd at a loss. He watched Elspeth's cattle, fewer in number but still healthy, and his resentment grew. He watched the capped pipe in her pasture, a symbol of her wastefulness, and it infuriated him. That was water. That was life. Sitting in the ground, locked away by a crazy woman. 1977. The drought held. It tightened its grip. The land cracked. The sky was a pale, merciless blue for weeks on end. The social fabric of the county began to fray. Arguments broke out over irrigation rights. Old friendships were strained. The water table was the only topic of conversation. It was dropping everywhere. Some wells had to be lowered by 20-30 feet. It was expensive. It was a panic. Through it all, Elspeth's Folly sat untouched. The county had a new theory now. She was proud, too proud to admit she had been wrong. She would let her own farm wither before she unlocked that well and proved the gossips right, that she had needed it after all. Her pride, they said, was as deep and expensive as her well. Then came the spring of 1978. The rains did not come. The winter snow had been thin, a dusting that melted and vanished in a day. The ground was hard and barren. The new year was born thirsty. By May, it was clear this was not just a drought. This was a catastrophe in the making. Silas Croft was on the edge of ruin. His well was pumping more air than water. His cattle were gaunt. His fields were dust. He looked across the fence at Elspeth's land. Her herd was smaller now, but the animals were still in good condition. Her old well, though weakened, was still producing. It was enough for her reduced operation. It was an injustice. It was a personal insult. In the warped logic of his envy and desperation, Elspeth's quiet survival was an attack. Her foresight, which he still saw as madness, felt like a judgment on his own failures. And the sight of that capped well, that monument to her insanity, drove him to a new kind of madness himself. He decided to level the playing field. He decided to make her share his misery. He waited for a moonless night in early June, a night when the wind was high, carrying the scent of dust and despair. He took a 5-gallon can from his chemical shed. It was a potent herbicide, a soil sterilant he used to keep his fence lines clear. a chemical with a long, complicated name and a skull and crossbones on the label. It was a poison. He walked across his pasture, his boots silent on the dry, brittle grass. He slipped through the barbed wire fence. He knew her property as well as his own. He knew the location of the old well, the one by the barn, the one that kept her afloat. He found the wellhead, a simple concrete slab with a pipe and a spigot. It was old. It was vulnerable. He unscrewed the cap from the spigot. He emptied the 5-gallon can into it. The chemical, thick and oily, gurgled down into the throat of the well, into the aquifer, into Elspeth's water supply. He screwed the cap back on. He took the empty can with him. He slipped back across the fence. He was a ghost. It was a perfect crime. No one would ever know. In a day or two, her pump would start to fail. Her cattle would get sick. She would be ruined, just like him. It was, he thought, justice. The next morning, Elspeth Finch went out to water her garden. She turned on the spigot by the house. The water that came out had a faint chemical sheen. It smelled wrong. It smelled like almonds and death. She did not panic. Her face, a mask of calm, betrayed nothing. She turned off the spigot. She walked to the stock tank. The water level was low, and the few cows standing near it refused to drink. They just stood, their heads low, sniffing at the strange metallic odor. She knew. She did not call the sheriff, not yet. She did not run to her neighbors. She did not weep. Her actions were methodical. They were precise. They were the actions of a person who has been waiting for a specific kind of disaster for a very long time. First, she disconnected the old well from the electrical panel in the barn. She silenced the pump that had served her family for a quarter of a century, a pump that was now a source of poison. Second, she opened the gate to her north pasture, a section she had kept in reserve, with access to a small, still-clean pond fed by a seasonal spring. She moved her small herd, what was left of it, to this new pasture, away from the contaminated stock tanks. Third, she went into the barn. She moved aside a stack of old hay bales. Behind them, leaning against the wall, was an 80-gallon Wellextrol pressure tank, still in its dusty cardboard box. Next to it was a coil of black polyethylene pipe. Fourth, she took a set of keys from a hook in her kitchen, heavy, industrial-looking keys. She walked out of her house, across the yard, and began the quarter-mile walk to the east pasture, to Elspeth's Folly. Silas Croft was watching, from his kitchen window with a pair of binoculars. He had been watching all morning. He saw her at the garden spigot. He saw her at the stock tank. He saw her move the cattle. He smiled. It was working. She knew something was wrong. The panic was setting in. Now would come the tears, the phone calls, the defeat. But she was not walking toward the road. She was not walking toward his house to beg for water. She was walking east, toward the capped well. He watched, puzzled, as she knelt by the steel pipe. He saw her unlock the heavy padlock. He saw her lift the hinged access plate. She reached inside. A moment later, he heard it, faintly on the wind, a low hum, the sound of a powerful motor deep in the earth, coming to life for the first time in 6 years. He watched as she connected a temporary hose to a fitting on the wellhead. He watched as the hose bucked and straightened. He watched as a torrent of water, clear and powerful, exploded from the end of the hose, soaking the dry pasture. It was a gusher, a river of life erupting from the dead land. Elspeth let the water run for 10 minutes, flushing the line. The water was cold. It was pure. It was untainted. It was drawn from a depth of 450 feet, from a separate, deeper aquifer, sealed off from the shallower, contaminated one by 100 feet of solid rock and a thick layer of bentonite clay. A fortress of water. Silas Croft lowered his binoculars. His hands were shaking. He did not understand. He had poisoned her well. He had ruined her, but there she was, with more water than she could ever use. Clean, abundant water. It was not foolishness. It was not grief. It was not madness. It was a plan. The events of the next few weeks moved with a grim inevitability. Elspeth called the sheriff. She did not make accusations. She simply reported that her well was contaminated. A deputy came out. He took samples. The lab report came back a week later. The water contained high levels of 2,4,5-trichlorophenoxyacetic acid, a herbicide, a potent one. The well was declared unusable, permanently. The story spread through the county, but this time it was not a story about Elspeth's foolishness. It was a story about her luck, her incredible, unbelievable luck. To have a second well, a backup well, ready to go at the exact moment her first one was mysteriously poisoned. The timing was miraculous. The men at the Arrowhead Cafe were silent. The laughter had died in their throats. They tried to frame it as luck, as a blind squirrel finding a nut. But the numbers, the details they had memorized as a joke, now told a different story. The depth, the stainless steel pump, the sealed casing, the remote location. It was not random. It was a design, a strategy. They looked at Elspeth Finch with new eyes. They saw not a grieving widow, but a formidable opponent. A player in a long game they had not even known they were watching. Silas Croft's ruin was quiet and complete. No one ever proved he did it. There were no witnesses. But everyone knew. In the small, closed world of Custer County, the truth did not need a courtroom. It needed only consensus. And the consensus was that Silas Croft was a man who had tried to poison a widow's well. A man who had been outsmarted by the very woman he scorned. His ruin was not legal, but economic and social. His own well finally gave out completely by August. He had no money to drill a new, deeper one. His credit at the bank was suddenly no good. The men who had once shared coffee with him now avoided his gaze. He tried to sell his land, but the drought had crushed property values, and no one wanted to be neighbors with a man like him. He had poisoned Elspeth's well, the shallow one, the one that was connected to everything else on the high plains, the one that was vulnerable. He did not know about the second well, the deep well, the isolated well, the well that was not a well, but a statement, a fortress, a final move in a game he never knew he was playing. He had played checkers. She had been playing chess. For 6 years. The drought broke the following spring. The rains returned. The land began to heal. But the water table did not recover. Not completely. The years of heavy irrigation and lack of rain had taken their toll. The age of easy water was over. The new logic of the land was one of scarcity, a logic that Elspeth Finch had understood 6 years before anyone else. Her second well, Elspeth's Folly, became the farm's main source of water. It was hooked up to the house, to the barns, to the new efficient drip irrigation system she installed in her garden. The 80-gallon pressure tank was finally taken out of its box. The Danish pump hummed away deep in the earth, a testament to her foresight. The story of the two wells became a piece of local folklore, a lesson about pride and foolishness, and the quiet, deadly intelligence of a woman who listened to the land instead of the gossip. It was a story about a single, pivotal decision. A decision that seemed like madness to the world, but was, in fact, the only sane thing to do. And to understand why Elspeth Finch spent $12,453.72 in 1972 on a hole in the ground she would not use for 6 years, you have to understand the man she married. And you have to understand the maps he left behind. The maps that showed the slow, inevitable decline of the upper aquifer. The maps that showed the geological anomaly, the deep, protected pocket of ancient water beneath her east pasture. You have to understand that her decision was not an act of grief. It was the fulfillment of a promise, the final move in a plan that began the day Thomas Finch read a government report on groundwater depletion and understood that the future of his farm, the future of his family, lay 450 feet straight down. Let me show you those maps. Let me take you back not to the drilling of the well, but to the years of quiet research that made it necessary. Let me show you the pages of Thomas Finch's notebooks, where the real story is written.